This happened last fall during a solo drive I took from Minnesota to Idaho. Most of the route was empty, just long stretches of forest, open plains, and some rolling hills the closer I got to the west. Outside the first and final hour of the trip, there really wasn't much around. Because of how I'd planned everything, I knew I'd be on the road through the night and most of the following day. It was the only way to avoid turning it into a 2-day trip and having to pay for an extra motel stay. It wasn't ideal, but I figured I could handle it. I set off around 6:30 in the evening. I made sure everything was packed, my bag was tucked in the back, and I had a few snacks and drinks within reach in the passenger seat. The first hour or so was just passing through city roads and a handful of smaller towns, but after that, it opened up into wide, empty highway. Traffic faded out, and places to stop became few and far between. Every now and then, there was a gas station about every 20 miles or so. Roughly 2 hours into the drive, I noticed I'd only burned through a third of my fuel. Still, with how spread out everything was becoming, I figured it would be smart to top off before getting too deep into the rural parts of the trip. It took about 25 minutes before I spotted a small station just off the road. No one else was there. It had 4 pumps and a closed-up shop. Lights off. No signs of life. I pulled in beside one of the pumps, got out, and started fueling up. For some reason, the gas was coming out painfully slow. It felt like it took nearly a full minute to get a gallon out. Maybe the equipment was old, or maybe the tanks were running low, I wasn't sure. I leaned back against my car and waited. That's when I saw another vehicle coming down the road. The limit was 50, but they were going well under that. Maybe 25 or 30. They passed by the station at first, then slowed down even more, reversed and backed up to the entrance. On a narrow road, that kind of move wasn't just odd, it was risky. Then they turned in and parked directly at the pump behind mine. I assumed maybe they'd just passed the turn too fast and circled back because they were running low on gas. I kept my focus on the pump in front of me as I heard a door open and footsteps step out onto the pavement. Whoever it was walked to the side of their vehicle but didn't say anything or start fueling right away. After about a minute of silence, I glanced over to check. A tall man in a faded blue flannel and dark jeans was standing by the driver's side. The strange thing was, he was already looking at me, not moving, just staring. When our eyes met, I gave a quick, polite nod and a faint smile, then turned back toward my own car. Still, I had the odd feeling he hadn't looked away. After maybe 10 seconds, I finally heard him lift the pump and start fueling. That small sound brought a sense of relief. Maybe I was just reading too much into it. Probably just another late-night traveler like me. I gave it another minute, then decided I didn't want to stand out there any longer. I finished up, put the nozzle back, and sealed up my tank. As I turned to head back to the driver's side, I noticed he was looking at me again. Something about his eyes was strange, like they were distant but wired at the same time. He looked completely drained and jittery, like someone who hadn't slept in days but was still running on pure caffeine. I climbed in and drove off without saying a word, just someone acting off, I told myself, nothing more. A couple hours passed, and eventually, a light rain started falling. By now, I'd been on the road for nearly 5 hours, and the dashboard clock had just clicked past 12:15 a.m. The rain made driving more difficult. I had to stay more alert, which only made the trip feel more tiring. I cracked open a can of something fizzy and tore into a protein bar, but none of it helped much. By the time it hit 1 o'clock, I knew I needed to pull over. My tank was dipping toward empty anyway. I stayed on that desolate stretch of highway until I finally spotted another station. It looked worn down, clearly older, but the lights were on and everything seemed operational. Not a soul around. I pulled up and filled my tank again, then drove a few feet over and parked beside the building in one of the side spaces, just to rest for a few minutes before hitting the road again. I checked the weather to see how long the rain was expected to keep up and searched for the closest town. But according to the map, I was smack in the middle of nowhere. Not a single town for miles. I figured I could afford a quick nap, just 30 minutes to reset my focus and maybe let the rain ease off a bit. I reclined the seat and dozed off. When I opened my eyes again, the rain was still tapping steadily on the roof, and my alarm hadn't gone off yet. Only about 25 minutes had passed. I rubbed my eyes and sat up, glancing through the windshield. Everything outside was still and quiet, except for one thing. There was a car now parked at one of the pumps. I leaned in closer, trying to make it out through the glass, and my stomach dropped. It looked exactly like the same car from earlier, same color, same shape. Unless I was imagining things, it was him. I scanned the lot, but the guy wasn't standing by the pump or sitting inside the vehicle. He wasn't anywhere in sight. That was the part that unsettled me the most. This station was bare. No bathrooms, no shop, no side buildings. If he wasn't outside and he wasn't in his car, where was he? A chill ran down my neck. I felt my chest tighten. I didn't want to stick around to find out. I turned the ignition and shifted into reverse, ready to pull out of the lot. But as I checked my rearview mirror, my breath caught in my throat. He was there, inside the car, sitting in my back seat, just staring straight at me with a blank, unblinking expression, barely visible in the darkness. I panicked. My hands flew off the wheel as I shoved the door open and jumped out, hitting the wet ground hard. The car, still in reverse, started rolling backwards slowly. I scrambled to my feet and took off running toward the woods nearby. My heart was pounding in my ears, but I didn't hear him follow. From the trees, I turned to watch. My car kept backing up a few more feet, then came to a stop. A second later, he slid into the front seat and drove off, disappearing down the road and leaving me behind in the pouring rain, stranded at some unknown station, miles from anything. That's when it hit me. I'd left my phone on the dashboard. I stood frozen for a moment, rain soaking through my clothes as I tried to wrap my head around what had just happened. Then my eyes drifted back to the other car, the one he'd arrived in. He'd left it behind. I cautiously walked over. The driver's door was unlocked and the keys were still in the ignition. A few grocery bags were tossed into the back seat. Out of sheer instinct, I checked inside and spotted a phone on the floor near the front passenger side. I picked it up. It was locked, but I could still use the emergency call feature on the lock screen to dial for help. At the time, I thought the guy had just made a mistake. Maybe he was in a hurry or just careless enough to leave his own car behind. But that wasn't his car. As it turned out, it had been reported stolen earlier that week. The groceries, the phone, all of it belonged to someone else. Whoever they were, they'd been through something similar, but from what the investigators later told me, their outcome wasn't as fortunate as mine. The officers believed that he hadn't slipped into my back seat at random. He let me start driving for a reason, probably waiting for the right moment to do whatever he had planned. Maybe he wanted to catch me off guard once we were miles away from any sign of life. Maybe worse, no one ever found him. And my car? It vanished too. This happened back in January of last year. I live in a modest little house tucked away in a quiet wooded town, about a 40-minute drive from the nearest city. That day, I had a short shift and was back home by early evening. By around 6:45, I was settling in for a relaxed night when I got a call from a friend. He said his car was acting up again and asked if I could swing by to pick him up and maybe grab a bite to eat on the way back. This wasn't the first time I'd helped him out, so I told him no problem, I'd be there soon. I grabbed my coat from the hallway closet, picked up my keys, and headed for the front door. But the moment I opened it, I jolted backward. A man was standing right there on my porch, no more than a foot away from the threshold. He had a thick winter coat on and a black fleece neck gaiter pulled up to cover most of his face. What struck me was that he didn't flinch. He didn't seem startled at all by the sudden door opening. I, on the other hand, had nearly jumped out of my skin. For a second, I felt almost silly for being so startled, but then I caught myself wondering, why was he standing there in the first place? Before I could ask, he calmly said he was just about to knock. I told him it was fine and asked if he needed help with something. He paused for a moment, then asked if I was someone named Marcus or maybe Darren. I couldn't quite catch it, but neither name was mine. I told him no, and without saying anything else, he just nodded and turned away, stepping off the porch. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and locked it right away. I didn't head to my car until I saw him walk the full length of my driveway, and disappear down the road. The whole way to pick up my friend, that moment kept playing in my head. My place is in a really tucked-away area. It's not the kind of neighborhood people wander into by accident. The houses are spaced out, and the driveways are long. It's not common for strangers to just walk up and knock on random doors. If he really was looking for someone, it was odd that he ended up on mine. I figured that probably explained the whole thing. I picked up my friend. We grabbed something quick from a local diner. Nothing fancy, just a burger and some fries. And I dropped him off at his place not long after. By the time I was heading back home, it was right around 9 p.m. A light snow had started falling, but everything else felt peaceful and still. When I pulled into the driveway and stepped inside, the warmth of the house was a welcome change. I shrugged off my jacket, made my way to the couch, and turned on the TV. With no work the next day, I didn't bother checking the clock. I figured I'd just relax until I felt tired. I probably stayed on the couch for close to 2 hours before I finally stood up to get ready for bed. I shut off the TV and stretched, making my way toward the stairs. As I passed by the front entryway, I suddenly remembered the man from earlier, the one who'd been standing right outside my door. The whole thing had slipped my mind, but now that it came back to me, I decided to check the front door, more out of habit than real concern. I peered through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty, and everything looked calm outside. Snow was still falling lightly, the wind barely moving. Just as I was about to turn away, something caught my eye. A faint disturbance across the driveway. I couldn't make it out clearly, so I unlocked the door and opened it a crack for a better view. There were footprints, clear impressions in the thin layer of snow. They led from the road, up the full length of the driveway, and curved toward the side of my car. From there, they veered off into the yard and disappeared beyond the tree line where the woods began. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I quickly shut the door and locked it again. If this was the same guy coming back a second time, something was off. Really off. I stood near the windows, glancing between them, trying to figure out what I should do. The longer I replayed our earlier conversation in my head, the more uncomfortable I felt. Something about it hadn't been right, and in that moment, the unease was enough to make me grab my phone and call the police. I called emergency services and stayed close to the window while explaining everything to the dispatcher. As I was talking, I kept catching faint noises, something soft, just barely noticeable. But every time I paused to listen closely, it would stop again. I'm sure I sounded paranoid. Then, maybe a minute into the call, a sudden, violent bang hit the back of the house. I nearly dropped the phone. It startled me that badly. I rushed into the hallway, heart pounding, just in time to hear another loud impact. I looked toward the rear door. Through the contrast of indoor light against the pitch black outside, I could barely make out some kind of movement. Someone was on the other side. Another hit slammed into the door. It was heavy, like they were using a tool or something solid to try and break through. The dispatcher told me I had two options: lock myself somewhere safe or try to get out if I had the chance. I decided to take the risk and make a run for it. I grabbed my keys, unlocked the front door, and sprinted toward my car. The thought of someone lurking nearby or hiding near the vehicle crossed my mind as I dashed into the open, but thankfully, no one was there. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove off without looking back. It was the right call. When the officers arrived, they found the back entrance busted in and soaked from the snow. Wet footprints covered the floor inside, but whoever it was had already gone. All I could really offer them was a description of the man I'd seen earlier that evening, the one who'd been standing on my porch. But since there wasn't any concrete proof linking him to what happened, even if they did track him down, there wouldn't be much they could do. They never found him, and whether it was the same person or not, I can't say for sure, but I do believe one thing. Running into him when I opened that door earlier might have saved me without me even realizing it. If I hadn't crossed paths with him earlier, I probably wouldn't have thought to check the door before heading upstairs. I might have already been asleep by the time he came back, and who knows how quietly he could have broken in if that were the case. The scariest part is how ordinary that day had started. Nothing felt out of place. It could have been any random evening, Sometimes I still feel like I'm just waiting for it to happen again. This all happened back in 2019. I was in my second year of college and doing some part-time babysitting to help cover my car payments, 3 or 4 nights a week, depending on who needed me. One of those nights each week I watched a little boy named Theo. He was 3 at the time. His parents were quiet but polite. They always left around the same time in the evening, usually close to bedtime. All I really had to do was make sure Theo stayed asleep and was safe while they were gone for 4, maybe 5 hours. That particular night, I got there right at 8 p.m. I said hello at the door, and they told me Theo had already gone down for the night. They thanked me as usual, grabbed their coats, and left. I never asked much about where they went. I think once they mentioned something about driving into the city, maybe just a weekly dinner or some kind of routine night out. I dropped my bag by the kitchen and did my usual walk through the house, just making sure everything was quiet and locked up. Then I settled into a chair in the living room. They always told me to make myself at home, use the TV, cook something if I wanted, but most nights I'd just scroll through my phone to pass the time, checking on Theo's room every so often to be sure he was still sleeping soundly. Not even an hour had passed when my phone buzzed. It was Theo's mom. I picked up thinking something had come up, but her first question threw me off. She asked, "Did you just try calling me?" I told her no. I hadn't touched my phone except to check the time. I was still at their house and everything had been quiet. She went quiet for a second, then said she'd gotten a call from an unknown number. When she answered, no one spoke. Just silence on the other end. She figured maybe I'd gotten a new number or was calling from a different device, and something just didn't connect right. I reassured her that everything was fine. Thea was asleep, and the house was quiet. She seemed satisfied with that and hung up. I didn't think much of it after that. Probably just a parent double-checking out of instinct. I went to check on Theo one more time, then returned to the living room. Around 20 minutes passed. I was sitting there watching a video on my phone when I noticed a pair of headlights cutting through the blinds and lighting up the walls. They weren't flickering or moving, just a steady beam pouring through the front windows. I figured maybe it was a neighbor coming home, but after a couple of minutes with the lights still shining into the house, I got curious. I stood up, walked to the window, and tilted one of the blinds. A beat-up gray sedan was parked right in front of the house along the curb. It looked worn down with rust along the edges and windows tinted so dark I couldn't see anything inside. I was focused on the car for a moment, until I noticed someone standing nearby. Just off to the side, near the end of the driveway, a man stood facing the house. He wasn't moving, just watching. From the way he was positioned, I could tell he wasn't just passing by. He was focused on this house. I started to feel uneasy, but I didn't want to go outside or confront him, especially since it wasn't my property. So I stayed hidden behind the blinds and watched. After a minute or so, the man walked back toward the car and got in, but the way he pulled off was strange, slow, like he still hadn't taken his eyes off the house. I watched the headlights trail down the road, cutting through the spaces between trees until they suddenly stopped again. Farther down the road, through the trees, I could still see the faint glow of the headlights, completely still. Then they blinked out. It looked like the car had parked. Maybe he got out. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was looking for an address and got the wrong house. Maybe it really was nothing. But something about it didn't sit right. I stood there for several more minutes, watching the street. But the man never returned. I tried to convince myself it was just an odd coincidence and went back to sit in the living room. I considered messaging the parents about it, but I didn't want to cause any unnecessary concern, especially if it turned out to be nothing, and realistically, there wasn't much they could have done anyway. I decided to switch on the TV, keeping the volume low so it wouldn't disturb Theo upstairs. A few minutes later, still feeling unsettled, I got up and pulled the blinds open fully. Even with the show playing, my thoughts kept drifting back to the car and the man. Time passed slowly. I think it was an hour and a half, maybe 2, but nothing else happened during that stretch. I stayed on the couch, trying to keep myself awake. My body was slumping a little, and my vision was starting to blur at the edges, that in-between state of being half asleep, where your eyes are open but your brain isn't really registering anything. Somewhere in that dazed state, I caught a faint sound, a soft thud. It didn't fully register until I heard it again a few seconds later, this time just sharp enough to snap me out of it. I sat up straighter, alert now. Unsure what it was, I figured I should check on Theo first. I started heading toward the stairs, but just as I passed through the hallway, I heard the sound again and saw something in my peripheral vision. I turned my head toward the back door. There was a man outside. His hand was gripping the handle, and he was staring straight at me. The moment our eyes met, he started yanking at it harder, jerking the door back and forth like he was trying to rip it open with brute force, and a wave of panic hit me. I turned and sprinted up the stairs. I went straight into Theo's room, scooped him up from the bed, and tried to keep him calm while I listened. From upstairs, the pounding got louder. Now it sounded like he was hitting the door with something. Maybe a tool or some kind of metal bar. With Theo in my arms, I hurried back down the stairs as fast as I could manage. Just as I reached the bottom, I heard one final crash. Something sharp and ugly, like plastic and metal, snapping under pressure. I rushed toward the front hallway, but as I passed the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of the back door swinging open. He was already inside and moving fast. He was dressed in plain, everyday clothes. Nothing that would have stood out. Dark hair, medium build. That's all I had time to register before I noticed the knife in his hand. He didn't pause. He charged straight at me. I bolted out the front door with Theo still in my arms, dove into my car, and reversed down the driveway as fast as I could. Just as he reached my window, I hit the gas and sped off. I drove to a nearby gas station and called the police right away, and then the parents. By the time anyone arrived, the man was long gone. Looking back, I really believe he was planning to use the knife to intimidate or hurt me, maybe to take Theo. That's the feeling I can't shake. But how would he know the parents were gone that night? And why target that child specifically? The whole situation was disturbing enough, but what made it feel even more strange was how the parents reacted afterward. They thanked me briefly that night, but after that, I never heard from them again. No texts, no follow-up, no more babysitting jobs. It was like they wanted to cut all ties completely. I ended up doing a bit of digging myself just to see if anything would surface. I didn't uncover much, but one thing did stick with me. I found out that the mother had previously been married to someone who vaguely resembled the man I saw that night. There's no way to know if it was him. I'm just piecing things together based on instinct and what little I found. It's been a few years now, and I've accepted that I probably won't ever get the full story.